everybody, it's Chris Sims here from ComicsAlliance.com, and this is Here's the Thing. Now, normally I would be coming at you from right over there, which is my living room, where I normally sit on my couch underneath a framed portrait of Destro to do these little video chats that we like to have. Instead, today I am coming to you from my extremely cluttered office, where I am in front of a stuffed Destro. There's a lot of Destro in this house. I lead a very Destro lifestyle. The reason for this is because this week's video did not happen. The original plan was to have a debate about Captain America with my co-writer Chad Bowers over whether or not Captain America killed during World War II. I don't think he did, and you guys all would have thought I was insane for saying that, but hopefully that debate would have convinced you that I am right, which of course I always am. Unfortunately, that video vanished into the ether, so we're just going to have that argument again at a future date. And don't worry, that'll happen, because if there's one thing Chad and I love to do, it's argue with each other about comics. It's why we work so well together. So instead of that, I am going to answer a few of your viewer questions in today's episode of Here's the Thing. I put the call out on Twitter. If you want to get in on that, it's twitter.com/theisb. It's the same way I put out the call last week for the Bad Comics Dialogue challenge. So once again, I'm going to you to crowdsource this video. And our first question is going to come from @ycarps on Twitter, who has a very good question that I've thought about a lot, which is, why don't superheroes make friends with their enemies the way manga heroes like Goku or Luffy or even Kamen Rider Fourze do? This is a pretty cool question to think about, because one of the things I really like about Kamen Rider Fourze, which was my favorite superhero story of the past 10 years, was that he didn't just fight the villains. He fought the villains and then helped them get through their teen problems that were causing them to turn into monsters and terrorize the school. And that's a really heroic thing to do, I think. It's one of the reasons I think Batman is so heroic, because he doesn't kill his enemies. He puts them in an asylum with the hope that they can get better. But they never do. As for why, I think part of it is because reformed villains don't really work as well as we want them to, and part of it is because when you have a really good villain, you don't really want to reform that villain. You want to keep that villain villainous so that you can keep using him or her and telling great stories. When you think about the reformed villains in comics, you get some characters like Hawkeye, like Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, characters that weren't really villains for all that long, so they got to move back into being heroes. The one who moves back and forth the most is really Namor, the Submariner, who was a hero in the Golden Age, and then a villain when he reappeared in the Silver Age, and then hero-villain. He was in a book called Supervillain Team Up with Doctor Doom, which is about as supervillain as you get. So the characters who are able to make that transition are few and far between. I honestly wish there were more, but occasionally you see it done really sloppily. One that I can remember was Major Disaster, who was a character who had really cool powers after the Underworld Unleashed crossover. And here we go on another tangent. Underworld Unleashed was a crossover that was designed to rehabilitate some of the stupid villains of the Silver Age by giving them new, hip, 90s looks and powers. And that sounds really bad. And in a few cases it was. But the story is actually pretty cool. It's got all these villains selling their souls to the devil and immediately regretting it because it's terrible. And Major Disaster actually got the coolest set of powers out of all of them. In his original incarnation, which I think was in the 80s, Major Disaster would just cause earthquakes or something. It wasn't that great. It wasn't that interesting. He fought the Flash a couple times. Whatever. But when he got his new powers, they were like chaos theory powers, which is I think how they were described. And he was given the ability to make this chain of events happen. So he could see all the interconnected events that are around him and manipulate them to what he wanted to do. I think the way that it was used first was he gets off a bus and throws a sandwich. Dog jumps at the sandwich, pulls someone into a cart. The cart gets knocked over. Apples go into the street. Someone trips on the apples, bumps into another guy. That guy steps in front of the bus that he's getting off of and gets run over because he was annoying Major Disaster on his bus trip. That's really cool. It also requires a lot of work on the part of the artist and on the part of the writer, which is why when Major Disaster was brought back and made a member of the Justice League by Joe Kelly, Major Disaster's power was to cause meteors to hit the Earth. So I don't really know why they don't make friends with their enemies, but that's my suspicion, because it's never quite as good as they want it to be. People would just rather have villains that were villains. That said, villains get a lot of play in the media lately. You know, who doesn't love Loki? If you're watching this on the internet, not you. You love Loki. Statistically, that is true. So I think we'll be seeing that back and forth. In fact, you already have seen it. There was the Loki in Young Avengers, the Loki that was in Journey into Mystery. Different aspects of a character are fun to explore, but with comics being the way they are, nothing really sticks. You want to see Batman versus the Joker. You don't really want to see a Batman-Joker team-up that lasts longer than 4 issues. So, sorry to @ycarps, I don't have a definitive answer on that. Next one, we have another question from @ycarps that was up on here on my screen. What makes the cast of Street Fighter so much more memorable than, say, Killer Instinct or Virtua Fighter? Now, @ycarps, let's be real here. What you mean is what makes the cast of Street Fighter better than Mortal Kombat. And I don't know, but they're awesome. I think it's because they shoot fireballs out of their hands. That's pretty cool. I actually wrote a Street Fighter story, and I wrote a Street Fighter story about 2 of my least favorite characters in Street Fighter, Dudley and Balrog, the 2 boxers. The characters that I really like in Street Fighter are Chun-Li and Sakura and Cammy. Ken and Ryu, those guys. Like the big characters, Bison. But even those characters that I didn't really like to play as in the game, even those characters that I wasn't too familiar with beyond that, they were fun to use because they're built around these interesting visual gimmicks. You have Balrog, who's this big, hulking bruiser, the guy who's super strong but still puts weights in his gloves to knock you out. You've got Dudley, the gentleman boxer. They play off each other really well. The fighting styles are really well done in Street Fighter. So you have these characters whose fighting styles reflect their personalities. And that's really cool. You've got Ryu's very forward focus. He shoots that fireball, and that fireball goes. Ken, his fireball doesn't go so well, but he's got the flashier move. He's got the big jumping uppercut. Those characters are easy to relate to on those simple levels. And I think that's what makes them come together in stories better. Believe it or not, the Street Fighter comics that were done by Udon were some of the best comics on the stands when they were coming out. I really love those stories, largely because those characters are able to work so well off each other in different situations. I think it's just a matter of, personality coming through the gaming side of things where they're fighting, and also the really cool designs that make them work. Tales to Enrage asks, do you think there are underappreciated comics crossover events, such as Annihilation being overshadowed by Civil War? Yes. Yes, I do. Specifically Invasion, which is my favorite crossover of all time. If you want to do a crossover, look at Invasion. If you're a comic book writer and you want to do a crossover, look at Invasion. If you're a publisher, look at Invasion. Here's why. Invasion is 3 issues long. That's it. 1, 2, 3. Done. They're 80-page giants. So it is as big a event as anything else. 3 issues. Just takes a summer. It doesn't overstay its welcome, and it has an interesting effect on the DC universe. I've written about this before. They got Bill Mantlo, who wrote Rom Space Knight, wrote The Hulk, wrote all kinds of Marvel stuff. He was Marvel's kind of go-to fill-in writer for a long time. DC brings him in to write Invasion, which is the most Marvel crossover DC has ever done. In fact, it ends with aliens detonating the gene bomb to give the DC universe the equivalent of mutants. It's super Marvel. Todd McFarlane draws it. That's how Marvel it is. But it's also really fun. It's got space adventure. It's got Snapper Carr. It's got all kinds of stuff. And the tie-ins are really cool, too. It takes this idea that there are multiple alien races out there that hate Earth. And they're just going to team up and invade. So you've got the Dominators from Legion of Superheroes, the Kuns, the Thanagarians, all people coming together to destroy Earth, and they have to be fought off in various books. It had the best tie-ins of any crossover that I can remember, too. The Suicide Squad tie-in was really good. The Justice League tie-in was really good. The Animal Man tie-in was really good. And a lot of that has to do with, Suicide Squad, Justice League, and Animal Man being great books at the time. But still, I think it holds up. You mentioned Civil War and Annihilation, and that's definitely a contender. Annihilation is great. That's why we're getting a Guardians of the Galaxy movie, something that I don't think anyone ever thought would happen. It's because Annihilation was so good. And I loved the conflict between Annihilation and Civil War as they played out in the stories, in that Civil War is about a piece of American congressional legislation, and Annihilation is about the destruction of the universe. I think my favorite scene from Civil War is when Nova shows up and they're like, "Hey Nova, you haven't registered." Nova's like, "Yeah, I was kind of busy punching a nihilist in the mouth and pulling his guts out and saving the universe. So that's, I'm gonna go ahead and not register. Thanks. I'm gonna go be in space for a while." Matthew _ says, "Seriously, how would Batman feel about killing vampires?" Can't kill someone that's already dead, I guess. Just shove a stake in it. It's fine. Silver Batarang. In fact, there are stories where Batman has made silver Batarangs. Batman and the Mad Monk by Matt Wagner. When he fights a vampire named the Mad Monk, he melts down the Wayne heirloom candlesticks to make silver Batarangs to use on a vampire. It's pretty awesome. He also drives his car through that dude's house and, suplexes a wolf. I've recommended that comic before. You guys really need to get on it. That comic's great. Another L on Twitter says, "Kirby defined the Marvel style, Dan DeCarlo defined the Archie style. Did DC ever have such an influential artist? And if not, why not?" I think the obvious answer here is Curt Swan. But the question is whether Curt Swan's art was influential on more than just Superman. Swan was the definitive Superman artist from the 50s to the 80s, long-time Superman artist. Defined the Silver Age look of a lot of those books. Alongside guys like Wayne Boring, Al Plastino, Murphy Anderson, who frequently inked Curt Swan. So he's definitely a huge influence on what was going on at DC at the time, because obviously they wanted those books to have a uniform feel. I would say, though, that there are a couple other artists who are equally as important for shaping the sort of DC house style of that era. You had Gil Kane was a big one, who brought that kind of exaggerated Marvel sense to DC, particularly on Green Lantern. You had Mike Sekowsky, who drew Justice League, who really is what I think of when I think of Silver Age art, because he's got those very flat, very barrel-chested characters. But the one that really sticks out, and the one that I think is most influential, the one who's most copied even today, would be Neil Adams. Adams had originally started at Marvel, of course. He did X-Men with Roy Thomas. But when he comes over to DC and teams up with Denny O'Neil to do Batman, it's a really big shift in how those comics looked. They wanted to have that ultra-detailed style. I get in arguments all the time about whether Neil Adams or Jim Aparo is the definitive Batman artist, and I always side with Aparo, because Aparo put the work in. Aparo drew 100 issues of Brave and the Bold, and they're perfect, and no one draws fights better than Aparo. But even with Aparo, you can see the influence on, or from Neil Adams creeping in. And you get that a lot even today. There aren't a lot of people emulating Neil Adams' current style, but you get a lot of people trying to echo that realistic look. I heard someone, it might have been Chad actually, say that there are two schools of comics art that show up at DC Comics that descend from Neil Adams, which is the more realistic style. So from that you get your Jim Aparos, you get even your Alex Ross. The other school is the Alex Toth style, which is the very simplified cartoony style, from which you get your Bruce Timms, you get Cliff Chang, maybe as an example of a guy who follows that style. DC as a house style is really hard to pin down because it was also fragmented. You had, even though it's a single DC universe, it wasn't until the 80s and 90s that it really felt like a single DC universe. You had your Superman books, your Batman books, your Wonder Woman books, your Green Lantern books, Flash, etc. And they all existed in their own little bubbles of fictional cities. So they didn't cross over as much as you might expect. Unlike the Marvel books, which were a very unified vision of a small group of creators. Kirby, Lee, Don Heck, those guys. So the idea of a house style is hard to pin down, but Adams, I think, is a really influential artist for shaping what those books looked like. Brandon Hyde on Twitter would like to know if I have any thoughts on Gorilla Grodd. Of course I have thoughts on Gorilla Grodd. Gorilla Grodd's great. He's great Grodd. He's Gorilla great. Okay, that didn't really work. But Gorilla Grodd is one of the perfect Silver Age concepts, because he's not just a gorilla. He's not just a talking gorilla. He's not just an evil talking gorilla. He's not just a psychic evil talking gorilla who can hypnotize you with the force of mind. He's a psychic evil talking gorilla who comes from a city of super intelligent good gorillas. He's a gorilla criminal who comes to the regular world and becomes a regular world criminal. Or as regular world as you get when you're fighting the Flash. Gorilla Grodd's great. There's so much working there. There's so much piled on top of Gorilla Grodd. It's fantastic. I love him. I love that he is technically a foreign national who needs to be extradited to a hidden gorilla city. That's brilliant. Psy_Phi_Soul says, have comics about anthropomorphic animal characters been forever ruined by the internet and furries? Are any worth reading? Look, first of all, just let people be what they're into. You know? Nobody's ruining anything except Sonic the Hedgehog, and Sonic the Hedgehog was never any good anyway, so just let it be. As for whether comics about anthropomorphic animal characters are worth reading, yes! Some of the best comics of all time are about anthropomorphic funny animals. You know what? Here we go. Let me move the Kamen Rider Forza rocket and pull out some Donald Duck comics. This is A Christmas for Shacktown by Carl Barks. This was a recent printing by Fantagraphics that are doing the Carl Barks library for Uncle Scrooge and Donald Duck. These are perfect comics. They're perfect. They are incredible. They are beautiful, beautiful stories. They're engaging. They're adventurous. If you want to know how to make comics, you got to read Carl Barks. Along with Tintin, along with Floyd Gottfredson's Mickey Mouse, which is another great comic starring an anthropomorphic animal. These are the comics that kind of form the foundation for an entire generations of people who aren't doing superhero books, people who are more into big, weird adventure stories that are still kind of funny. They're really good. I think a lot of people don't read these, and they don't read the Floyd Gottfredson Mickey Mouses either. Mickey Mice? I think they're Mickey Mouses. If it's multiple comics about one mouse, Mickey Mouses? Mickey Mice. Mickey Mouses. Anyway, people don't read them because they're about Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck, and they think they know what's up. They think of them as just these kids' characters. Unlike Superman, who's certainly not a kid's character. Unlike Destro, who's definitely not marketed at 10-year-olds. They look at them and they think, oh, these are just weird, funny animals. They're not. They're adventure strips. I wish I could tell you how many times in that first year of Floyd Gottfredson Mickey Mouse comics that he threatens to murder someone with his bare hands. Not Floyd Gottfredson, Mickey Mouse. Mickey Mouse's catchphrase in those comics is, and I quote, "I'll break you with my naked hands," which is weird. He also packs heat a lot in those comics. A lot of guns. So, you get these characters that are adapted to work in multiple situations, because that's the essence of comedy. You know, you put someone in an unexpected situation, whether it's a pie getting thrown in your face, which does not usually happen, or whether it's Mickey Mouse joining up to be a mail plane pilot, which happens a lot. There's a lot of Mickey Mouse flying in those, and there's a lot of Uncle Scrooge getting wind of a hidden treasure somewhere that he has to go find. And that's fun. That's the essence of adventure, and it's the essence of comedy at the same time. So, definitely, comics about funny animals are great. Comics about anthropomorphic animal characters are awesome. You know, even Sonic the Hedgehog, the comic, is probably pretty good. Ian Flynn is a great guy who writes fun stories, so I don't want to disparage him. But let's be real here. The best Sonic the Hedgehog game is not as the best Sonic the Hedgehog game is not as good as the worst Mario game. That's real talk. This has been Here's the Thing. That's all the questions we have time for this week, but we'll be back next week with another topic where I will sit on a chair in my house and explain something to you. If you'd like to get in on that, follow me on Twitter @theISB. If you have a suggestion for a future topic, leave one right here at YouTube or on comicsalliance.com, or hit me up on Twitter. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great week.